It's coming up. So tonight we're going to talk about Purim. We're going to be in the book of Esther. You can find that right now if you want. You'll be way ahead of the game. We're going to talk about Purim and what it's about. It's been celebrated for hundreds and hundreds of years. And yet this is one of the interesting holidays. God didn't command it. This was started out of a heart of thanksgiving, honor, and praise for what God did. God spared the Hebrew nation and came in and interceded, did an amazing work. And so after that, their heart was toward God because of just how he orchestrated this salvation, even when they weren't in their own homeland. They were being protected when they were in a foreign land. So it's an amazing story. So that's what we're going to look at tonight. We're going to look at the book of Esther and Purim. What do you guys think of when you think of Purim? Anything yet? No? Yes? Dress up parties, fun stuff like that? Justice. Good. In our house, we think of Hamantash and cookies. That's always the favorite thing. Since I was little, my daughters give me the head nod. We'll make some for next week. They're fun. But, different foods for different seasons. That's the one thing Mom always made during this time. So it's kind of fun. So we'll go through and let's start with chapter 1. Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, this was Ahasuerus, who reigned from India even to Ethiopia, over 127 provinces. Think how far that is. Think of on a map from Ethiopia all the way to India. That's a large piece of land, and it's a very rich piece of land. Trade routes went through there. The East, all the wealth they had there, and the wealth of North Africa and everything in between. Very wealthy area, and a huge area he reigned over. Then in those days when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan the palace, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast unto all the princes and servants of the power of Persia and Media, and nobles, princes of the provinces, being before him. When he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom, the honor of his excellent majesty, many days, even 180 days. So 180 days, he took people on tours and just showed how amazing what he had accumulated. He was a very strong, powerful king. The other part is, think of how big that land was, and your mode of transportation was maybe a horse or a donkey or whatever you rode or you walked. It took a while to get there. So he's probably a wise king, give them plenty of time to get to where they should be. And at the end of verse 5, the end of these days were expired, the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in Shushan the palace, both great and small, 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace, where were white and green and blue hangings, fastened with cords of fine linen, purple to silver rings, pillars of marble, beds were of gold and silver upon the pavement of red, blue, white, black marble. And they gave them drink in gold vessels, the vessels being diverse one from another, royal wine in abundance, according to the state of the king. And the drinking was according to the law, none did compel, for so the king had appointed to all the officers of his house that they should do according to every man his pleasure. I want to stop right there. This talks about each one drinking just what they wanted to, no more, no less. If they wanted to have another glass, they could. At some affairs, you were compelled to drink every time the king drank. And if you weren't much of a drinker, you might be carried home. So it's but this was not the case here. There's a lot of really bad teaching about this book. Some say that he was drunk and demanded all kinds of things. It's not. If you read what it says, everyone could drink what they wanted and they didn't have to. This was not a wild, raucous party. You were before the king who could take your life whenever he wanted to. So you would mind your business. You wouldn't be raucous and crazy. You would behave yourself. So verse 9, also Vashti the queen made a feast for the women in the royal house which belonged to King Ahasuerus. And on the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehun, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abtha, Zetar, and Carcas, and the 7 chamberlains that served in the presence of Ahasuerus the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with a crown royal, to show the people and the princess her beauty, for she was fair to look on. So think about that. For 180 days, he showed all the riches, all the most precious things. He was showing how wealthy and how well he had done. And on this day, he wanted to show his most precious thing, and probably the most expensive piece of jewelry that existed in the kingdom, that crown that his wife wore. And it said he was just merry with wine. It doesn't say he was drunk at all. Some people try to interject that, but you really have to stretch. So he was happy. He said, bring in my wife, make sure she's wearing the crown. But Vashti refused to come to the king's command by his chamberlains. Therefore was the king very wroth, and his anger burned in him. Okay, this is probably the biggest celebration he'd ever put together. Think about it. If you had a party that took 6 months for people to come and stay, and then this is the climax, you have this huge feast, and everything was as perfect as you could make it. And now, your wife, the queen, decides she doesn't want to participate. Think about it. That'd be like having a Super Bowl and one team says, nah, we're not coming. They don't want to go. You know? Opening of a huge movie and the star says, I'm not going to be there. I don't have time. This was a big thing. He was upset, and you could see that he was upset. Verse 13. So when the king said to the wise men, which knew the times, for so was the king's manner toward all that knew the law and the judgment, and next to him was Karshina, Shethar, Amatha, Tarshish, Merez, Marasen, Lumican, and 7 princes of Persia and Media, which saw the king's face, and which sat the first in the kingdom. What shall we do unto Queen Vashti according to the law? Because she hath not performed the commandment of the king, Ahasuerus, by the chamberlains. Now think about what could happen. We'll see further in the lesson, and I'm sure you guys have read this, that if you walked in at the wrong time, off with your head. So what kind of punishment do you think might have been in line for someone who refused the king? Possibly it could have been death. That could have been what the punishment would be. Now, you're in this great celebratory time. Do you want to off with the queen's head? Great ending to a party, guys. Come look at my whole beautiful kingdom and let's chop off the queen's head. Not a good finish. He needed wisdom. He asked the guys that were at the top of the kingdom. Here's the reply. And Muhammad can answer the king and the princes. Vashti the queen hath done wrong to the king only, but also to all the princes and to all the people in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the deed of the queen shall come abroad unto all the women, so that they shall despise their husbands in their eyes, when it shall be reported. King Ahasuerus commanded Vashti had been brought before him, but she came not. Likewise shall the ladies of Persia and Media say this day unto all the king's princes, which have heard of the deed of the queen. Thus shall there arise too much contempt and wrath. If it please the king, let there go a royal commandment from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, that it not be altered, that Vashti come no more before King Ahasuerus. And let the king give her royal estate unto another that is better than she. Wow. That guy was a politician. What a great idea. We don't have to kill her. She just, never before, into the royal. And we'll strip the royal title. And she'll go from the top back to wherever they put her. Wow. Good idea. When the king's decree, which shall make published throughout all his empire, for it is great, all the wives shall give to their husbands honor, both great and small. Yeah, well, if the king has no problem putting away the queen for dishonor, disrespect, and disobedience, we better think about it as well. Now, we read not too long ago, we went through the book of Titus, where it said, don't act in a way, women don't act in a way that dishonors your husband, so that would dishonor your walk with God before men and people who want anything to do with the type of religious practice you're in. When you think about the Middle East right now, even to this day, what do you think about? Many of the women are in hijabs, right? Hijabs, however you say it. They're covered head to toe, walking behind the men, very subservient. It's a little rough. This isn't what we're talking about, but this is what ended up, maybe from this. More and more, it got worse and worse. I mean, this queen had a huge amount of power. She had a huge party with all the ladies and had her own thing. But in this one thing, She said, no, I don't want to. So now he's trying to walk this backwards, save honor, and somehow pull this out from his great party to a great catastrophe. But he didn't execute her. Verse 20, when the king's decree, which he shall make, shall be published throughout his empire for its great, all the wives shall give their husbands honor, both great and small, and saying, please the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. For he sent letters to all the king's province, to every province, according to the writing thereof, to every people in their own language, to every man who could bear rule in his own house, that it should be published according to the language of every people. Now listen to this. To every man should bear rule in his own house. You ever heard of the house castle doctrine? A man is king of his own house. That even plays in law today. You get to protect your house. Sometimes with deadly force. And it goes back to your house is your castle doctrine. It's good for yours. Now, we pull it from English law. Many times they cite English law when they say that. I wonder if it didn't start way back in. I mean, with this decree of this great king, and it just continued for centuries. Interesting. I thought that was amazing when I read that. I go, wow. Every man should bear rule in his own house. Interesting. So, after these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus was appeased, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what was decreed against her. Now, this part's interesting. I wonder if he cared for her and missed her at this point. You know what I mean? When you go through something as amazing as a life like that, and you share that with somebody else, and now, this is later, she's not there. Some reason, and I think it's because he missed her, missed having a queen at his side to ask questions, to govern with, that the king's servants that ministered under him, let there be fair young virgins sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom. They may gather together all the fair young virgins unto Shushan the palace, and the house of women under the custody of Hiji, king's chamberlain, keeper of the women, and let their things for purification be given them. And let the maiden which pleased the king be queen instead of Vashti. And the thing pleased the king, and he did so. He needed a replacement. He needed a queen. How would it look if somehow he wasn't a king that could have a queen? It would be out of balance. It just wouldn't fit. So, and this whole process, this is a large process that took everybody's attention, what? Away from the fact that there was no queen in the kingdom, into this huge, if you will, beauty pageant. You know, the first Miss World, whatever. I mean, maybe this is where it all started. So all these young girls, let them come before, be given all the things of purification, and then let the king choose. Interesting. Verse 5. Now, Shushan in the palace, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, son of Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity, which had been carried away with Josian, the king of Judah, and whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, carried away. And he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother, and the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter. Now, he took responsibility of her just like she was his own daughter. That was it. And they put this new home together. It doesn't say what happened to Mordecai, if he was married, had a wife, lost a wife, but this was a tough time. Hebrews were not in their homeland. They were gone. They were dispersed all over the place, and they're in this new kingdom, going by all these new rules. And Mordecai said, don't tell anybody where we're from. Don't tell anybody our background. Just keep that quiet. So when it came to pass, when the king's commandment and his decree was heard, and many maidens were gathered together at Shushan the palace in the custody of Hijai, and Esther was brought also to the king's house in the custody of Hijai, keeper of the women. Now, it says she was brought. It doesn't say she could choose to go. They're in a new land. I'm not sure, but it may have been that you had no choice. As a young woman, the king said, come, you had to go, right? Remember the Song of Solomon, they went through the land and she had to go, right? We know how that story went, but so you're out of your country, your mom and dad are dead, you have an uncle that's your dad now, and now you're gone. into a strange place you've never been, into a house you've never been, into a palace with all these other women from all over the world. What a confusing time for this girl. I mean, that had to be, I can't imagine it myself. Everything you knew was gone. Everything new started. What you ate, what you wore, how you bathed, what creams you used, everything changed overnight. And she was immersed in this whole new place. And the maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him, and speedily gave her the things for purification, with such things as belonged to her, and 7 maids, which were given to her out of the king's house, and he preferred her and her maids unto the best place in the house of the women. Esther had not shown her people nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her that she should not show it. Now she listened to her uncle. She did what he said. Even in this new place, she listened to his wise counsel and did what he said. And now Mordecai walked every day before the court of the women's house to know how Esther did and what should become of her. He was like a good dad. Every day, how's she doing? Is she okay? He loved her. He wanted to make sure everything was safe. And wouldn't you be concerned if your daughter was in a completely new place? How would she know how to act? How would she know how to behave herself? You'd hope she didn't make mistakes, right? Verse 12, and now every maid's turn come to go into the king, Ahasuerus, and after she had been 12 months, according to the manner of women. For there were the days of purification accomplished, to wit, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with sweet odors, and with other things for the purifying of women. Then thus came every maiden unto the king, and whatsoever she desired was given to her to go with her out of the house of the women into the king's house. Okay, a whole year, and you're instructed how to dress, how to bathe, what to eat, and what to do. Wow. Not a lot of fun. How many here would just say, oh, I want to go somewhere and they're going to tell me everything I do for a year, and I'm going to have to follow those instructions? Yeah. I don't think my young daughters would want to do that. They don't want instructions every day. They don't want to be told what to do, what to eat, what to wear. They have their own opinions. This girl, though, went with it and listened to whatever authority God put over her life. We'll see that as we go forward. And in the evening she went, and on the morrow she returned to the second house of women in the custody of Shechazaz, the king's chamberlain, which kept the concubines, and she came unto the king no more, except the king delighted in her, and she came, were called by name. Now when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abigail, son of Mordecai, who was taken her for his daughter, was to come into the king, she required nothing but what Hegai, the king's chamberlain, the keeper of women, appointed. Esther obtained favor in sight of all of them that looked upon her. She was a smart girl. She listened. She didn't know the king. She didn't know what was going on. So she listened and obeyed the authority that God had put in her life at that time. Even an uncomfortable, unsure of somebody she just met, she obeyed authority because it was the right thing to do, and it worked for her. So 16, Esther was taken into King Ahasuerus and into his house, the royal, in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. And the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. So he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. See, it changed then. Disobedient one was replaced by what? An obedient one. The rebellion was gone, and obedience was brought forth and put in the place of power. The king made a great feast unto all the princes and servants, even Esther's feast. And he made a release to the provinces and gave gifts according to the state of the king. And when the virgins were gathered together a second time, then Mordecai sat at the king's gate. Esther had not yet shown her kindred nor her people, as Mordecai had charged her, for Esther did the commandment of Mordecai, like as when she was brought up with him. So, she was obedient to the godly authority, her uncle, who was in the place of her father, right up until this time where she gets married. And then it changes. We'll see the shift in the story. This story has a lot to do with obedience and authority and how that works and how God can bless that when we fall under proper authority. It protects us, and then God can protect us. So in those days when Mordecai sat by the king's gates, 2 of the king's chamberlains, Bigtha and Thurish, of those who kept the door, were wroth and sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. And the thing was known unto Mordecai, who told it unto Esther the queen. And Esther certified the king thereof in Mordecai's name. And when inquisition was made of the matter, it was found out, therefore they were both hanged on a tree, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king. See, this is a godly opportunity. Sometimes things come into our life that we just go, where did that come from? Why am I listening to that? Should I listen to that? Should I leave? And yet they're there and God's going to use them. And it didn't say he ran because he didn't want to hear it, get in trouble, get in the middle of something. He listened and reported to the king. What if it was wrong? Could have been trouble. But God made this opportunity to put him in future, we'll see later, in the king's good graces. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of the Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the provinces that were with him. We have a new guy on the scene here, Haman. Now, when we were doing Purim with the kids and they were little, every time you said Haman, they'd go, boo. Or if you're outside, you're supposed to write Haman on the bottom of your shoe and then spit and then rub it in the dirt. He's the bad guy. We're into the bad guy now. I remember the kids would get reading back and forth, and sometimes this thing would get going so fast, they'd say the wrong, they'd boo, and they're supposed to yay and yay because the names come up pretty fast. It made it kind of fun. We'd read this when we did Purim at home, just read through the book one night. And the king's servants that were with the king's gate bowed and reverenced Haman, for the king was so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai bowed not, nor did he give him reverence. This is important, this little line here, because it gives precedence to us in how we live. We're supposed to obey the laws of the land, except when? When it goes against the law of God, we don't move. You don't bow to anybody but God. You don't worship anybody but God. And bowing is a form of worship. And he said, nope, I can't do it. Even though the king decreed that this guy Haman was supposed to get this worship, because he was elevated. He wanted everybody to know, listen to Haman. I set him in a place of authority. So he's trying to, the king, a good leader, was trying to build up this guy. He just moved into a position of authority. Listen to this guy. But he wouldn't bow. Then the king's servant, which in the king's gate, said unto Mordecai, why transgressest thou the king's commandment? Now it came to pass when they spake daily unto him, and he hearkened not unto them, that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's matter would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. Well, there it goes. So in the midst of this, why don't you do this? I'm a Jew. I worship the Most High God, and I cannot bow to anybody but Yahweh. I won't. I can't. I'm instructed by God not to. And they wanted to see if this thing was going to stand. Verse 5, and Haman saw Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence, and Haman was full of wrath. See, at this point, Haman does something really dumb. He raises himself above God Almighty. He knew. They told him why he wouldn't bow, because he was a Jew, and he would not bow to anybody but God. It was a religious thing. Now, you could say if Haman was a more cool-headed guy, you go, oh, I understand. Okay. Does he do what I say? Okay, that's good enough. But no, oh no. He wanted that self-worship. He wanted that guy to do exactly what he said. He wanted to be above that guy, and he didn't care about the God that he's supposed to worship. And he thought to scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for he had showed him the people of Mordecai, wherefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai. So now his heart is against God and his people. Deeper and deeper. Put down the shovel. You're digging a hole. In the first month, that is the month of Nisan, the 12th year of the king Ahasuerus, they cast Pur. That is the lot before Haman from day to day, and from month to month. To the 12th month, that is the month of Adar. So Purim is the casting of the lot. Now what does the Bible say about casting of the lot? So we're not supposed to do that? It doesn't say don't cast the lot. What does it say about the casting of the lot? It says God determines the casting of the lot. Now, gambling and casting a lot are a little different, but they use that sometimes when they couldn't understand or couldn't come to a decision. They would simply say, Lord, what is it? And they would cast the lot, and the way the lot would fall, they would follow. We see it when there was a problem and they were defeated before their enemies, and they cast the lot right down to the exact man who stole and caused them to have problems. We see that they use in the New Testament when they need to pick the next disciple. They cast lot or drew straw, and they picked the 12th disciple because one was missing. So this was a common thing. Now, in America, we have some bias against gambling, so it's hard for us. In my house, the idea of casting the lot or something like that, oh, my mom and dad, that's gambling, that's terrible. You know, my dad wouldn't do anything to do with the stock market, that's just gambling. I'll have nothing to do with that. Very strict interpretation of what this says. But the Bible says that God controls the lot. So this is what was happening. Verse 8, Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there's a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of thy kingdom. Their laws are diverse from all the people. Neither keep they the king's law. Therefore it is not the king's profit to suffer them. If it please the king, let it be written that they be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those who have charge of the business, to bring it to the king's treasuries. And the king took his ring from his hand and gave it unto Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the Jews' enemy. Now at this point, the king mistakes Haman's hatred for loyalty. They may put weight on somebody that they're working with, and they think, okay, someone's in a stressful thing, you don't know about it, and the next thing you know, you got a problem. This is the point where the king says, oh man, this guy has got my back. He's found some rats in the kingdom, and he's going to take care of them. I'm glad he found them. Don't anything stand his way. I don't need any more problems. You know, they tried to kill me a while ago. He might have been a little flinchy at this point. So there's a whole bunch of people that don't listen to his laws, won't obey him. Take my ring and snuff him out. But he didn't go and find out if it was true. He just turned it over to Haman. King said to Haman, silver is given to thee and the people also, to do with them that seemeth good to thee. And there were the king's scribes called the 13th day of the first month, and written according to all that Haman had commanded unto the king's lieutenants, and of the governors, and they were over every province, and to the rulers of every people in every province according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, the name of the king Ahasuerus, as it was written, and the sealed with the king's ring. And the letters are sent by post to all the king's provinces, to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, even on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to take the spoil of them for prey. Now, by this, Haman wants to take what God has given to his people and give it to those that follow him. The deeper he goes, the worse it gets. He's going against the Creator God. First he goes against a man that serves him, then against the people that serve him, and now he wants what God has given his kids as his own. He is not setting himself up for a good future. The copy of the writing and commandment to be given to every province and published to all the people, that they should be ready against that day. Post went out, being hastened by the king's command, the decree was given to Shushan the palace, and the king and Haman sat down to drink, and the city of Shushan was perplexed. Now, why were they perplexed? Confused. What have these people done to deserve this? Maybe these people came years ago with no land, came, worked, now are fitting into society. I would think that they would say, I know these Jewish people. They're good people. I haven't thought of anything wrong. Otherwise, you would be confused. If they were bad people, they go, oh, that makes sense. Let's get rid of them. But no, they're perplexed. Why? What is this thing? You're going to kill all these people? That makes no sense. Mordecai perceived that all was done. Mordecai rent his clothes and put on sackcloth with ashes and went out into the midst of the city and cried with a loud, bitter cry. Why did he do that so quickly? As I was sitting there today, I'm going through this stuff. Could the thought went through his mind that not bowing to Haman caused this whole thing? And that he was responsible, even though he's being right before God. Don't you wonder if he knew that this was all because of his little brush up with Haman? And he understood that this was because of what I did. And he was distraught. And even came before the king's gate, for none might enter into the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. In every province, whethersoever the king commanded, and his decree came, there was a great mourning among the Jews, fasting, weeping, and wailing. and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. Now here is an interesting place, because the heart of the Hebrew people immediately turned to God. They turned to Yahweh right away. They knew that this was too big, nothing they could do. They had no army, they had no city, they had no capital. They were sprinkled throughout all these nations, all across from North Africa all the way to India. They couldn't stand together. They were totally at everyone's mercy. And what they had was a spoil, was a prize. They knew they needed help, and the only one that could help from there to there was God himself. As I'm going through this, and this is funny, God bumped me about this, and he said, hey, what's this story about? You think it's anything like you're going through today in this country? I had to think about that for a while. So let's get back to the story. Esther's maidens and chamberlains came and told her, and the queen was exceedingly grieved, and she sent raiment to Mordecai to take away the sackcloth from him, but he received it not. Then called Esther for Hathach, one of the king's chamberlains, whom he appointed to attend her, and gave him a commandment to Mordecai to know what was and why it was. Now, here we see a shift. Esther now commands Mordecai. She's the queen. And he falls under her authority without a problem. You see, when we can fall under authority and not get all twisted about it and just follow what God puts in our life, it can go easy with us and God can protect us. What if Mordecai said, you better listen to me, you little missy. I'm your dad, I'm your uncle. I'm not going to be commanded by you at all. No, that wouldn't have worked, would it? So Hathach went forth to Mordecai unto the street of the city, which was before the king's gate. And Mordecai told him all of what had happened to him, and the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay the king's treasuries for the Jews to destroy them. What if he said, no, I want to tell the king myself? No, he listened to Esther. Also, he gave the copy of the writing of the decree that was given to Shushan to destroy them, to show it to Esther, and declare it unto her, and to change her that she would go unto the king and make supplication to him, to make request before him for her people. And Hathach came and told Esther the words of Mordecai. And Esther spake unto Hathach, and gave him the commandment unto Mordecai. And all the king's servants and all the people of the king's provinces do know, and whatsoever, whether man or woman, shall come unto the king to the inner court, who is not called, there is one law of his to put him to death, except such which whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter, that he may live. But I have not been called to come unto the king these 30 days. And they told to Mordecai Esther's words. Then Mordecai, now catch this, commanded to answer Esther. Interesting. Oh, I just lost it. There we are. Yeah, then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape the king's house more than all the Jews. All of a sudden there's a shift, because now Mordecai's not talking his own authority. He's speaking on behalf of God. God's authority always trumps man's authority. And Esther was a smart girl, and she understood this. Then Esther bade them to return Mordecai this answer. Go, gather all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also, my maidens, will fast likewise. And so I will go unto the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way, and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. See, he obeyed, because she listened to God. He spoke in God's authority, and she listened. She spoke back as a queen, and he listened. And that short sentence, such a time as this. We're in a very strange time in this country. Amen. And you're here for this, such a time as this. There's a class on Monday for such a time as this. There's things that are happening in this country for such a time as this. When God bumped me, it was just like sitting in a car riding with somebody. They go, hey. And then they say, look at that, or listen to this. He goes, what's the story of Purim and Esther all about? I go, well, it's an inside guy, and an outside guy is a good guy that comes in and ruffles the feather of the inside guy, and then there's trouble and a fight, and Eventually, the inside guy is out and the good guy's in. He goes, yeah, interesting. What's going on in this country right now? See, when you look at stuff going, how many of you listen to prophecy or pay any attention to it? How many are following a couple of prophets and seem to be getting stuff right now? There's one guy who had an interesting prophecy, and his prophecy was probably a month or so ago, and he said there's going to be betrayal, and there's going to be betrayal like you've never seen. The close people will betray people. He said, God said, and I will, and first he said, I have not given up on this country, I will hold up this country, but there's going to be betrayal. And he said, the sign I will give you is the sign of a mighty wind. And there's a lady, third in the Republican Party, who turned her back and voted against our president. Right? Cheney. What state is she from? Wyoming. The day or two before she betrayed the president, what happened in Wyoming? 105-mile-an-hour winds ripped through Wyoming. Well, that was the first prophecy. Second prophecy he gave was again, this one he says, God says, I've heard the cries of my people. I've seen the things that are going on. I have not given up. I have heard you and I will intercede. And the sign that I will give you that this is coming true is what? Snow. Now, we have not seen snow in this country like the snow we've just seen in years and years and years. So, as you look at what they're doing, forcing people to take something they're calling a vaccine, which isn't, controlling lives, threatening to shut off a state and not be able to travel between states, gun laws 127 that's going to take your guns in every magazine and make you a criminal, and you have to put them in a place where the police know or the government knows so they can come and take them if they want to. All these laws are rushing through. Oh, thousands of people losing their jobs, places being closed, and all this stuff. God's hearing what's going on. He hasn't forgotten America. He has a plan. But we have things to do. Partially about what the fifth is about is for us to pray. Our job is to pray. Our job is to not give up. There's prophets that are speaking, and what they have said, God has done weeks later. Now, there's a lot that have gone back. I no longer have anything to do with these wishy-washy prophets. I like the crazy ones that say, I don't care what you say. This is what God said, and this is what I say. Reminds me of the old crusty guys in the Old Testament, right? But that's a godly prophet. Even when people laugh and say you're a nut. And look what's in front of you. They go, I don't care what I see. I'm telling you what God said. So as we go forward in this time, I couldn't wait to get to the story. Because when we go through the story next week, it gets even more interesting. We'll do the rest of the second half of the story. But God put it on my heart that this has got something to do, and what happened to the story has bits and pieces that are paralleling what's happening here. How many were waiting for something to happen before the 20th? Right? Well, that same prophet said, I don't care about man's dates. I don't care about man's time clock. Right? Does anybody know when the first presidents and the first presidents were inaugurated? March 4th, March 4th, March 5th. The new stuff was changed. And there's a whole spiritual thing that happened with that, and I'll tell you why if you want to talk later. I don't want to get into that right now. But we're at some interesting times. We need to continue to pray that things are right, that things are going on. Just a little bit of politics before we go, because if you know me, I'll talk about two things you're not supposed to, right? Religion and politics, any day. That's my favorite thing to do. So in Arizona right